What's up, guys? I'm back again with another custom build. This time it's actually a client build. So he provided me with all of the core components: the Asus Maximus 9 Hero, the Intel i7 7700K, the Samsung 960 EVO SSD. This is a Gigabyte G1 Gaming GTX 1080, and then it's in a Corsair 570X. All of the other components, and he had the Dominator Platinums, 16 gigabytes. So all the other components as far as the water cooling was all up to me to sort of choose the components and install. He pretty much gave me free reign on what I wanted to do. He's seen my previous work, so he pretty much trusted me to, just do what I wanted, make it look good. So the only things I really kept in mind, and he didn't necessarily request this, but knowing the client and them having very limited knowledge of water cooling, I did not want to install a complicated loop that would potentially cause problems in the future. Namely, I wanted to leave adequate access to any of the core components as far as the graphics card, memory, or even accessing any of the plugins on the motherboard, so that if need be, they would be able to swap anything out in the future, or potentially add another graphics card without necessarily having to disassemble the loop, because that's obviously not something that they're going to want to tackle, and they may not want to have to come to someone to do that, to simply maybe swap out the RAM. So that's a lot of the reason that you see the all of the tubing is pretty well routed around the perimeter. I think it turned out pretty good. I prefer, especially if the graphics card were to be water cooled, to see the components maybe going around throughout the inside of the case a little bit more for visual aesthetic. But in this case, I think it suits the client well, and I think it looks really nice. So the other thing I wanted to do, since I knew sort of how I wanted to configure the fan, I got a 360 rad in the front. You can't really see it because I put a piece of acrylic as sort of a shroud, namely to hide the UV strip that's behind there, but it actually just ended up cleaning that up. And then I've got the one exhaust fan here, so I wanted to sort of route the tubing in such a way that when you look down through the top of the case, since with the 570X it's glass on top, you'd have sort of something interesting to look at. This is UV reactive fluid. I'm not going to show you the system with the lighting on because it causes problems with the autofocus on the camera. But if you've seen UV reactive fluid before, you pretty much know what to expect. This has laser green in it, so actually when it's under the light, the UV light, it actually has a little bit more of a yellowish glow, whereas under normal light with the UVs off, it's got a little bit more of a lime green sort of look to it. So that's kind of neat. There's all kinds of RGB functionality, both in the video card, the motherboard, and the front fans, so client's going to be able to sort of customize that lighting. And then I went, you've got a hint of orange on the SSD here, and then even though you don't really see it, but on this card you've got some orange on the fan shroud. So I went ahead and added just a little flash of that in the custom sleeving here. These are fully sleeve cables, so from the power supply all the way to the components, I built these cables from the ground up. So if you've seen the back of this case, and I don't have a turnstile, I'm not going to turn it around, but it allows you to get a little bit cleaner routing on the cables. So but I've got a UV strip back here and then I've got another one up top, which gives nice even lighting. It even picks up the orange on the sleeving, so that sort of glows as well under the UV lights. The loop is pretty straightforward. Now, I did something a little interesting here, and I was using things that between myself and the client we had already had. So rather than your typical sort of pump res combo, this is actually just the EK Plexi Top D5 pump, and I've used like a low profile or slim, whatever you want to call it. It's a male to male fitting to attach the reservoir essentially upside down directly to the pump. I'm using the Singularity Core reservoir mount, which is amazing. You'd look at it and think it's a little bit expensive. I think it's around $62, but it's very good quality. It's machined aluminum, and it gives you really good option for being able to mount directly to the radiator, especially in this particular build. It made a whole lot of sense because I didn't really want to have to modify the client's components any as far as drilling into the case and that sort of thing. But I went ahead and I've got the drain valve right off of here. Works out really well. I've already had to flush the system and drain it once, so it's a very easy loop to drain. Again, that's going to work out well for the client. But then obviously, since we're only cooling the CPU here, this sort of loop is very simple to achieve. So you know, again, this isn't the most extravagant build ever, but I think I achieved what I was going for here, and I'm pretty satisfied with the way it turned out. I love the cables. It's a black with the orange streak and then the carbon. But yeah, aside from that, it's pretty straightforward. I'm not a huge fan of this case when it comes to routing cables. There's nothing down here aside from, you know, drilling holes or putting in some sort of shroud. There's no way to hide anything that you route down here. I didn't have any issues with cables peeking out of here because I built custom length cables, so there was no, you know, excess cable crap for me to hide. But this stuff here, I mean, there's not really much you can do about it in this case. This is one of the areas where I think Corsair was asleep at the wheel when they were building this thing. You know, almost every other case has some sort of either grommets or even just some you know, cutouts in that shroud to be able to route this stuff. Every motherboard has connectors at the bottom, so I don't really understand what their thought process was there, but Corsair has a habit of really missing a few things that don't really make a whole lot of sense. But other than that, I mean, the case is pretty cool looking when you get the glass panels on it. The fact that it's glass all the way around gives it a really neat look. I don't care a whole lot about the fans in the front as far as the RGB stuff goes, but obviously a ton of people are really into that, so it's definitely a neat look. I've set all of the LEDs to like a purplish color that I think looks pretty awesome with the green and the orange, but obviously the clients can be able to just change that to be whatever they want. So aside from that, I don't really have much else to say. This build was pretty straightforward. You know, it's nothing mind-blowing, but I think it turned out nice and clean, and you know. So anyway, I still got a couple more builds in the works. If you guys follow my Instagram at Virility, I try to post things, you know, stuff along the way as I'm doing these builds, as you know, as well as some other random stuff. But if you kind of want to keep up with what I got going on, I would encourage you to follow there. Other than that, feel free to comment if you have any questions about how I did anything as far as the cabling, the water cooling. If you have any questions about what it's like to build in this case, I'd be happy to help out the best I can. So aside from that, I think that pretty well wraps it up. So I will see you guys in the next video.